Africa has never won a World Cup, not once. In almost 100 years of trying, no African men's team has even reached the final. Not Cameroon, not Nigeria, not Ghana, not Senegal. Never. Now look at who those same countries produce. George Weah, an African who won the Ballon d'Or, the award for the single best player on the planet. Didier Drogba, Samuel Eto'o, Sadio Mane, Mohamed Salah. African stars carrying the biggest clubs in Europe, winning the Champions League, breaking records year after year. The whole world already agrees on this. African football talent is second to none. Here's the fact that should stop you cold, family. When France won the World Cup in 2018, around 15 of their 23 players were of African descent. And I do not mean the bench warmers, I mean the stars, the best men on the field. Kylian Mbappe, father from Cameroon, mother from Algeria, was the finest young player in the entire tournament. N'Golo Kante, family from Mali, was the beating heart of that whole team. Pogba, roots in Guinea, scored in the final itself. The spine of the world champions was African. So say it plainly, African blood does not just play at the World Cup, African blood wins it. It has been the best talent on the planet this whole time. It just keeps winning in the wrong shirt, under the wrong flag, singing an anthem that was never theirs. And that should make your blood boil. So do not let anybody tell you Africa is not good enough. The talent has always been there, in overwhelming supply. The real question, the one they never ask on television, is this. If African players are good enough to win everything for Europe, then who decided they would never be allowed to win it for Africa? Because this was never a talent gap, family. It was a gate. And today, I am going to show you exactly who built that gate and why it has been held shut on purpose. And look at what that talent has done for everybody except Africa. Walk into almost any great European club of the last 40 years, and you will find an African star at its heart. Drogba did not just become a legend in England. He went back home to the Ivory Coast and helped stop a civil war with a single speech. Eto'o won trophy after trophy across Europe. Egyptians, Senegalese, Ghanaians, Algerians, and Nigerians have lit up every major league on that continent, filling the trophy cabinets of cities that were never theirs. And here is the cruel part. This is not almost good enough talent. This is champion talent, World Cup winning talent. It just keeps winning for everybody except the nations that grew it. That is not bad luck, and it is not a coincidence. It is a design. So let me show you exactly how that machine was built. The first wall is the simplest and the most insulting, the door itself. For most of World Cup history, the entire continent of Africa, dozens and dozens of nations, was rationed a tiny handful of spots in the tournament. Meanwhile, Europe was handed a huge block of places year after year. Go back to 1966. When the World Cup handed out its spots, Europe got 10, Latin America got 4, and Africa, Asia, and Oceania, all of them together, were told to fight over a single shared place. One, for half the planet. The message could not have been clearer. Your continent is not worth a guaranteed seat at this table. So Africa did something bold. Every single eligible African nation refused to play. They boycotted the entire World Cup rather than beg for scraps. And it worked, a little. Africa was finally granted one guaranteed spot. Just one, for the whole continent. Over the years, that number crawled upward. 2 spots, then 3, then 5. And then it froze at 5 and sat there for almost a quarter of a century, while Europe kept its dozen and more. Only now, with the tournament finally getting bigger, has Africa's number climbed to 9. Late, grudging, and decades after it should have happened. Think about what that rationing actually does. If you only let a few African teams into the tournament, you make it almost mathematically impossible for the continent to break through in numbers. You keep the sample size tiny on purpose. Europe floods the bracket with a dozen teams and calls it fair. Africa gets a handful and is told to be grateful. And this is exactly how they get away with it, family. Hold that thought for 1 second. Real talk, YouTube has shut down channels for telling stories exactly like this one. So I need you to find us off this platform. Go to blackstories-untold.com, join our mailing list, and make sure we stay connected no matter what they do. Now, back to the machine. Because rationing the door is only the first move. The second one is even more clever. They take the talent before it can ever grow up African. Here is how the drain works. A boy in Senegal, or Ghana, or the Ivory Coast shows a rare gift with a ball at 10, 11, 12 years old, and the scouts come. European academies pull the best African children across the sea while they are still teenagers. They grow up in Europe. They are trained in Europe. Their best years, their peak, their prime, all of it is spent making European clubs rich and European leagues great. The continent grows the seed. Europe harvests the fruit. And it gets sharper than that. Some of these players, raised in Europe, end up playing for European national teams. So the very genius that Africa produced does not just skip the African club. It skips the African flag entirely and lines up for France or Portugal or Belgium instead. Look at almost any powerhouse European side and start counting the African surnames. The engine of France, African. The stars of Belgium, of Portugal, of England, African blood. One single generation removed from a continent that never gets to claim them. Now flip it around and let the anger sit with you for a second. Imagine that same talent, all of it, pulled back home. Imagine Mbappe lining up for Cameroon. Imagine a Senegal, a Nigeria, a Ghana that got to keep every one of its gifted sons instead of shipping them off to win glory for the very countries that once colonized them. That team would terrify the entire planet. And that is exactly the team the world has quietly made sure you will never get to see. That is what was stolen, family. Not just players, the glory. The chance for African nations to stand on top of the world with their own children, in their own colors, hearing their own anthem play. They took that. And when an African nation does try to call its sons home, even for a few weeks, the European clubs fight it. There are club owners who have said out loud that they do not want to sign African players because those players might leave to represent their own continent in the Africa Cup of Nations. Let that land. They will take the talent. They just do not want it remembering where it came from. So now you have two walls, a narrow door and a pipeline that drains the best players out before they ever mature at home. But there is a third wall, and this one hits at the worst possible moment. Money. African federations run on a fraction of what European federations spend. And that gap does not just sit quietly in the background. It explodes at the exact moment an African team is about to do something great. Over and over, at World Cups, African squads have been thrown into chaos by disputes over unpaid bonuses, right in the middle of the tournament. This is documented. It is not a rumor. At the 2014 World Cup, the Cameroon team refused to even board the plane over unpaid money and showed up a day late. That same year, Ghana had to physically fly about $3 million in cash across the ocean to Brazil just to stop its own players from going on strike mid-tournament. Nigeria's players boycotted a training session over their bonuses right before they were knocked out. Picture that. You are one of the best teams on the continent. You have fought through everything just to get there. And instead of resting and preparing for the biggest game of your life, you are arguing over money that should have already been paid. European giants do not spend their tournament like that. They cannot even imagine it. That is what an empty treasury does to a dream. It sabotages you from the inside at the very moment you are closest to the top. And that brings us to the closest they ever came. The moment that tells this entire story in a single kick. This is the part that still hurts. For years, the ceiling for African teams was the quarterfinal. So close to the top four and never through. Cameroon reached it in 1990 and thrilled the world. Senegal reached it in 2002 in their very first World Cup ever after beating the defending champions in the opening game. But the one that breaks your heart is Ghana in 2010. It was the World Cup, held on African soil, in South Africa. The whole continent was behind Ghana. They fought their way to the quarterfinal against Uruguay, one win away from becoming the first African team in history to reach the semifinal. The match went to extra time, and in the very last minute, Ghana sent in a header that was going into the net. The goal that would have ended it. The goal that would have made history for an entire continent. And a Uruguayan player, standing on the goal line, reached up with both hands and slapped the ball away. Like a goalkeeper, he was thrown out of the game for it. But the damage was done. Ghana was given a penalty kick. One kick. One kick to win it for all of Africa, on African soil. The striker stepped up, and he hit the ball off the crossbar, inches too high. The whole continent's breath caught in its chest and then collapsed. The game went to a shootout, and Uruguay won it. Ghana went home. One hand on the line, one kick off the bar. That is how close the door came to opening, and it slammed shut again. Do you see the pattern now? It is not one thing, it is everything, all at once. Ration the door so few can enter. Drain the talent so it grows up somewhere else. Starve the budget so the team cracks under pressure at the summit. And then, when a team fights through all of that and gets one hand on history anyway, the smallest cruel moment slams the door one more time. And the world shrugs and says, well, impressive for an African team. Impressive for an African team. That phrase is the whole crime in 4 words. It is a ceiling disguised as a compliment. But here is where the story turns and where the payoff lands. Because in 2022, Morocco did something no African team had ever done. They did not just reach the quarterfinal, they smashed through it. They knocked out powerhouse after powerhouse and marched all the way to the semifinal, the furthest any African men's team has ever gone. And the whole planet watched an African team play like it belonged in the last 4 of the world, because it did. Morocco still did not reach the final. The ceiling cracked, but it did not shatter. And that crack is exactly why this story matters more now than ever. Because for decades, they sold you the idea that it just could not be done, that Africa was simply not built for the final. Morocco proved that was always a lie. The moment the structure loosened even a little, an African team surged toward the top, which tells you the only thing that was ever really holding them back was the structure itself. So here is the grand truth this whole story was built to show you. When an African player wins the Ballon d'Or for a club in Europe, the world calls it a beautiful talent story. They celebrate the genius. But ask them why the nation that raised that genius, that fed him, that gave him to the world, has never once lifted the World Cup, and suddenly the whole world goes quiet. Because there is no talent answer to that question. The talent was never the problem. The talent was never even in question. It was the gate. It was always the gate. This is the same machine BSU has shown you again and again, just wearing a different jersey. Take the raw genius out of Africa, grow rich on it somewhere else, and make sure the place it came from stays capped, subordinate, and grateful for the scraps. They did it with gold and diamonds and cobalt, and they do it with the beautiful game too. The players were never the problem, family. They were always the proof. The proof of how much was there to take and how carefully someone built the walls to keep Africa from ever holding up the trophy its own children keep winning for everybody else. This was Black Stories Untold, and as always, thanks for watching. If you want more stories like this, click the video on your screen right now.